On October 13th, 1972, a chartered plane carrying 45 people, mostly members of a Uruguayan rugby team, crashed into the Andes Mountains. The pilots flying through clouds had miscalculated their position. They began descending too early, thinking they'd cleared the peaks. They hadn't. The plane's wing clipped a mountain, shearing off. The tail section broke away, sucking passengers into the void. The fuselage tobogganed down a glacier at over 200 miles per hour before slamming into a snowbank. When the wreckage finally stopped, 33 people were still alive, but they were stranded at 12,000 feet in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. No survival gear, no winter clothing. Temperatures dropped to 30 below zero at night, and search planes, after 8 days, gave up. The world declared them dead, but they weren't dead. Not yet. For 72 days, they fought to survive in the frozen wasteland. And when food ran out, they made a choice that would haunt and define them forever. They ate the dead. This is the story of the Andes survivors. The first days were chaos. Injured passengers screamed in pain. Bones protruded through skin. One boy's intestines were exposed. They had almost no medical supplies, a few aspirins, some lipstick for cracked lips. The strongest passengers, led by medical students, tried to help, but many died from injuries. Others froze to death during the first night. The plane's fuselage became their shelter. A metal tube half buried in snow, open at both ends, offering minimal protection from the wind. They huddled together for warmth, sleeping in shifts. Food was scarce, a few chocolate bars, some wine, crackers. They rationed obsessively, each person getting a capful of wine and a square of chocolate per day. It wasn't enough. Hunger gnawed at them. And then, on the 8th day, they heard on a salvage radio that the search had been called off. They were on their own, no one was coming. If they wanted to survive, they'd have to save themselves. But how? They were surrounded by mountains with no climbing equipment, no map, no idea which direction led to civilization. The food ran out on day 10. Starvation set in quickly at high altitude, where the body burns calories just to stay warm. They melted snow for water, but water wasn't food. They grew weaker, more desperate. Some prayed, others wept. And then someone said what everyone was thinking. The bodies of the dead were frozen in the snow around them, preserved by the cold. It was unspeakable. It violated every moral, religious, and cultural boundary they knew. But the alternative was death. A medical student named Roberto Canessa made the argument, if I die, and you need to eat me to survive, I want you to. My body would just be an empty vessel. Use it. Others slowly agreed. They were Catholic, and they framed it as communion, the body given so others might live. On the 11th day, they cut flesh from a body frozen in the snow. They forced themselves to swallow. Some vomited, others couldn't do it, but hunger is a powerful motivator. Within days, everyone was eating. They never spoke of it as cannibalism. They called it the meat. They prayed before every meal, asking forgiveness. On the 16th day, disaster struck again. An avalanche roared down the mountain in the middle of the night, burying the fuselage in snow. 8 more people suffocated before they could dig themselves out. The survivors were now down to 19. Morale shattered, but a core group refused to give up. Nando Parado, whose mother and sister had died in the crash, became obsessed with escape. He could see mountains in every direction, endless white peaks stretching to the horizon. But he knew that somewhere beyond them was Chile, was civilization, was rescue. He convinced 2 others, Roberto Canessa and Antonio Vizintin, to attempt a trek. They had no equipment, no training, no idea how far they'd have to walk. But staying meant slow death. On December 12th, after 61 days on the mountain, the 3 men set out. They carried makeshift snowshoes, sleeping bags sewn from insulation, and human flesh wrapped in cloth for food. They climbed for 10 days through blizzards and sub-zero nights, scaling a 15,000-foot peak with their bare hands. On the 10th day of their trek, Nando and Roberto Antonio had turned back to conserve food, crested a ridge expecting to see green valleys. Instead, more mountains. Endless mountains. Roberto collapsed weeping. They had nothing left. But Nando saw something in the distance, a thin line of green, a river valley. They descended, stumbling, falling, crawling. On December 20th, they spotted a man on horseback across a river. They screamed, waved. The man saw them, 2 skeletal figures in rags, and rode for help. The next day, rescuers reached the crash site by helicopter. 14 survivors were still alive, huddled in the wreckage. They were emaciated, frostbitten, traumatized, but alive. The world watched in astonishment as they were airlifted to safety. And then the truth came out. They had survived by eating the dead. The revelation sparked global controversy. Some called them heroes, others called them monsters. The survivors held a press conference, explained their choice, asked for understanding. Most of the world forgave them. How could anyone judge a decision made in hell? The survivors returned to Uruguay as legends. They'd endured 72 days in the Andes, temperatures that killed, starvation, avalanches, and a moral abyss. They'd lost 29 friends, but 16 had made it home. Nando Parrado became a motivational speaker, wrote a book, and said the mountain taught him that life is precious and fragile. Roberto Canessa became a pediatric cardiologist, dedicating his life to saving children. The others rebuilt their lives, carrying the weight of what they'd done and what they'd survived. In 1993, they returned to the crash site, now a pilgrimage for some. The fuselage was gone, salvaged or buried, but the memory remained. They held a memorial, thanked the dead for their sacrifice, and descended together. "We didn't survive in spite of what we did," one said. "We survived because of it, and we owe it to those who died to live fully." The Andes survivors proved that humanity's will to live can overcome anything, even our deepest taboos. They made the impossible choice, and they lived.